This so-called think tank, Randy, puts out lots of studies, lots of economic reports, lots of expert analysis. That is basically during the insurance plan's bidding under the guise of a academic or think tank cover. So if you know that, it's very easy to see whose side they're on. Not ours as patients, not on physicians, not on underserved communities, not for rural hospitals. They're in it for their bottom line.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me today on Prescription for Success. I'm really delighted to have you, and I want to remind you that Prescription for Success is a production of MD Coaches, a company dedicated to putting healthcare professionals back in charge of healthcare delivery by coaching, mentoring, and supporting physicians at all stages of their career. You can find out more at mymdcoaches.com. Before we get into my interview today, I have a quick message for you from Advice Media. You know, it's not a secret that doctors have a hard time creating a professional-looking digital presence. Having a dynamic website, ranking in Google, or growing your volume of patient reviews are not easy tasks. We're just too busy to figure it out on our own. Advice Media has been around for over 20 years working with physicians to create a more brandable online image. You will attract more patients, generate more calls and emails, enhance brand awareness, protect your online reputation, and much more by contacting Advice Media today. 3 in 5 will choose one provider over another because of a strong online presence. If that's the case, what's your online presence saying about you? Don't delay getting an experienced team to help improve your digital presence. Go to drpodcastnetwork.com/advice media. That's drpodcastnetwork.com/advice media. Well, my interview guest today is not a physician himself, but he is a powerful advocate for all physicians as well as for our healthcare system as a whole. He's the founder of a consulting company based in Washington, D.C., and I think you'll find what he has to say very compelling. So let's hear my conversation with Grayson & Company CEO, Christopher Sheeron. Well, welcome everyone to Prescription for Success. I'm delighted to be talking to Chris Sheeron today. We call Chris a special interest guest because he is not a physician, but he is somebody that has become very important for physicians, and I'm looking forward to hearing his story. So, Chris, thank you so much for being here. It's a delight to have an opportunity to talk to you today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Randy. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's going to be a lot of fun. I've already given the audience a little bit of a taste of where you fit into our healthcare system today, and it is indeed very important. You are in the area that we loosely refer to as healthcare economics. But if you will oblige us, I'd like to treat you much like I treat the physician guests, and that is I want to talk about how you came to be where you are. So let's start at the beginnings. I gather from looking at the information that I have on you that you did most of your growing up in the New York metropolitan area. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, Randy. Born and raised in the great city of New York.
The cities don't get much greater than that, do they?
At least I don't think so.
So what was that like, and where did the influence come from that steered you into the career that you have now? Speaking in terms of your really early years.
No, it's a great question, Randy. when I was young, we ended up moving out to Long Island, and I grew up in a healthcare family.
Oh, did you really?
Believe it or not, which helped me get to where I am today. I had a aunt who was a physician. She ran her own primary care practice on Long Island. I had an uncle who was a neurologist, also on Long Island. Another uncle of mine served as a medic during the Vietnam War and received 3 Purple Hearts for his service during his tours.
Wow.
And my mother was a pediatric nurse, working with children throughout New York, throughout the eastern portion of the United States, and then ended up finishing her career at NIH, working as a pediatric executive there. So healthcare runs in my blood, so to speak. When I was in grade school, Randy, believe it or not, I put in my 8th grade yearbook under the line, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "I want to be a physician."
I'll be darned.
When I was younger, I also had a knack is not the right word, but certainly an interest and a passion for policy and politics. I got to high school. I went to an all-boys school on Long Island. I very quickly realized that I was not smart enough to be a physician.
Well, now let me hang on just a minute. I really want to hear a little bit more about that. Not smart enough. Enlarge on that a little bit, because you're a pretty smart guy.
I appreciate that, Randy. I would say that we talk so much in the healthcare community, right, about the intense education and dedication and training that you need to be a successful physician. I just really wasn't passionate about those topics that I needed to be.
So it sounds like it was not so much a matter of lack of intellectual capacity as that you didn't really feel that you would be a good fit for the bedside. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that more or less the way it was?
I think that's right. I found that I was much better, quite frankly, at social sciences, writing, history, languages. And so that obviously educated how I was going to progress in my young adulthood, I think, as my studies continued.
Well, it sounds like you made pretty good decisions, because obviously you've been very successful at what you do, and to be able to intellectualize it to that degree at that very tender age, I think is pretty remarkable. Was there anything, were there any individuals during your high school years that helped in that regard, teachers or relatives or anybody that might have helped you change your mind?
All the above, actually, Randy. I was very fortunate to have great mentors then, and I still do now. Family members who were supportive, teachers as well. I served as captain of our debate team in high school, for example. Really had some phenomenal coaches and mentor in that regard. I served as the editor-in-chief of our high school yearbook, which at the time was the largest high school yearbook in the United States.
Really?
And it gave me practice and increased my passion for these skills that I still use to this day.
So it sounds like you realized that you were a better than average communicator, and certainly your career reflects that. When you matriculated at George Washington University, that was sort of the basis of the plan. But did you foresee where it was going to go? Did you want to be a lawyer? Did you want to be a politician? What were you thinking in terms of the end game? That's
exactly right, Randy. I foolishly had this 5, 10, 15, 25-year plan for my life. And coming down to Washington, it was all based around politics. What I needed to do, where I needed to be, who I needed to meet, what I needed to execute on, what I needed to avoid. Life is strange. It never works out how you intend. I ended up meeting a mentor, almost a father figure of mine, on an airplane after my freshman year at university at GW. And he completely changed my life, got me off of the politics track, and got me into this line of work that I still do to this day in terms of public affairs, communications, and advocacy.
That's a great story. So you found a mentor?
I did, on an airplane.
Yeah. Did you stay in touch with him?
Still to this day.
Wow. What a great story.
And he's been such a huge influence in my life.
Yeah, and I bet he's proud of what you've become as well.
I think so. So we still very much stay in touch. And it really changed my life, especially on a professional track as well. But, George Washington was the only school that I applied to, Randy. I knew that I wanted to be in Washington, in our nation's capital. And luckily it turned out pretty okay.
Yeah, it really did. So did you find that portion of your education to be fun and comfortable? Was it difficult and oppressive? What were the learning years like for you?
It's funny you asked that, Randy. I felt that my college education from an academic standpoint was easier than my high school education.
That's rare.
I think so too. And also, I'm going to touch upon this later on during our conversation, but I love people. People drive me. People are a big part of my day-to-day life, not only family and friends, but also professionally. Quite honestly, I could not wait to get out of college. I wanted to graduate and get out into the proverbial real world. So every semester during university, I was interning somewhere, either in New York City, on Capitol Hill, for a public affairs firm that I ended up working for years after graduation. But I also graduated college in 3 years and cut a year off and compressed my time at GW because, like I said, was waiting to get out and explore what the world really had to offer.
Well, it's interesting. You indicated that you found university experience to be not as challenging as a lot of other people would have. And I would probably at this point have asked you if you ever considered going to graduate school, but it sounds like you more or less did that with these multiple internships that you did. And what little spare time that you had. Is that a fair assessment of things?
That's a very fair assessment.
Do you think it probably paid off far better than any graduate education that you could have ever had? I do.
I think so as well. I'm very much in that camp, Randy. Real world experience, I think, beats classroom experience hands down, at least for me. And I know for our physician friends who are listening, that's certainly not the case. But for me particularly, I think it was a better call not to pursue graduate studies.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have to say, I think probably physicians would agree with you on that because the real learning in medical education comes after you get that degree and you begin your life as an intern and subsequently as a resident, because after all, that's the real life part of it. You simply chose to do that of your own accord, and sounds like it paid off big time.
Randy, it's an interesting point too, because I've had friends who have started their own medical practices, and having a hint of entrepreneurialism in my bones, helping them think through how to start a business. It's amazing in medical school. They don't teach you how to run a business at all.
That's exactly right.
And these very smart people, far smarter than I am, they don't have that background or that foundation, and they're kind of learning on the fly.
Well, I think you've touched on something that in many ways explains where we are. And we talk a lot on this podcast about what went wrong in medicine. We as physicians feel that the control of what medicine should look like has been taken out of our hands by people who have no medical education at all. And we kind of gladly or effortlessly gave that control up. We ceded it to other people because we didn't think we were smart enough in business to be able to handle these big money issues. And retrospectively, I think that was the wrong way to approach it. But
agreed.
This program is about you. And again, to underscore, it sounds like you did exactly the right thing. In addition to your undergraduate education, you went out and got some really effective real world experience. And then after graduation, with that newly minted Bachelor of Arts on your wall, why don't you give us sort of the 30,000 foot view of what happened between graduation and where you are now?
Sure. To give you a quick rundown, Randy, I started my career after college working at the White House, spent some time there, and then quickly pivoted.
It's pretty good for your resume, probably.
It helps sometimes. and then quickly pivoted into the world of public affairs and strategic communications. Did that for quite some time. And during my time there and my tenure with my firm, I did a lot of healthcare work, whether it was on health insurance, biologics, biopharmaceuticals, regulatory issues. Was able to cut my teeth from a Washington perspective in terms of understanding healthcare policy and how the politics of healthcare work, which are arguably the most complex of any industry that we have within our economy. As fate would have it, Randy, I ended up being recruited by an internationally renowned headhunter himself to leave Washington and join his executive search and board recruiting firm up in Connecticut. So after spending about 10 years in Washington, I picked up my whole life and moved to Connecticut. Thankfully there, although I was wearing different hats from a career vertical, going from a public affairs consultant to an executive recruiter, I was also able to parlay that into other healthcare work just from that different vantage point. So I helped clients recruit senior executives and board members for their organizations.
And this was largely healthcare organizations?
Largely healthcare organizations. That's exactly right, Randy. Oncology startups in the Northeast, you name it. And then I had the opportunity to move back to Washington to start a DC office for that firm. And then being back, that entrepreneurial flair came up again. And I said, I've always wanted to, quote unquote, do my own thing. And that's when I launched my own company. Back in 2019. And it's been a wild ride ever since.
I bet it has. I was going to say that sounds pretty brave.
I appreciate that, Randy. It's been exhilarating. It's been extremely fulfilling. I'm very fortunate to work with such a great group of individuals and organizations. So I feel very fortunate. And what COVID has taught us is that the challenges abound. But when you're starting to build a business during a time of probably the most uncertainty of our lives, like I said, pretty exhilarating.
Remember medical school? You were confident, studious, hardworking, and you learned what to expect in all manner of patient care. Then reality struck. Regulations, expenses, staff management, and administration. Is this what we signed up for? Stress on the verge of burnout, no time for family, or the reason we got into medicine. Helping people. What are the options when you're afraid you're in the wrong career? Transition, teach, quit? What if there was another way? MD Coaches can help. We're a team of medical professionals with a century of experience in the clinical and business sides of medicine. More importantly, MD Coaches has been where you are, stressed and trying to navigate a world school didn't prepare us for. MD Coaches is your mentor, your confidant, to help you make your practice shine, navigate administrations, and successfully lead staff and projects. Or if you're ready to transition, we can help there too. MD Coaches is doctors helping doctors. Visit our website to receive a free, no-obligation consultation. Go to mymdcoaches.com/RX. That's mymdcoaches.com/RX. Isn't it time someone else was on your side? Don't let the business of being a doctor stop you from doing what you love. That site again, mymdcoaches.com/RX. Visit us today.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. I really want to hear, and I think our audience wants to hear, all of the details about the beginning and the mission and the success of Action for Health.
Absolutely, Randy. And we could probably do 10 of these sessions and not only scratch the surface on this issue in particular. I began working, Randy, on the issue of surprise medical bills back in the summer of 2019. And then fast forward to February of last year, I founded and launched Action for Health. We're a nonprofit patient advocacy organization that's dedicated to working on this issue of surprise medical bills. We like to say surprise medical bills because so many in the media, Randy, say surprise medical billing. That is not accurate. The activity of billing should surprise nobody. Physicians send their bill for their services rendered.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The surprise comes from the actual bill that they receive from this out-of-network provider, but we could, of course, dive into that. So for the past 2 years, we've been very focused on this issue. As your listeners will know, it was probably the most hotly contested healthcare issue up on Capitol Hill for the past 1 to 2 years. That and pharmaceutical pricing as well.
Well, I think a lot of physicians are going to be a little surprised to hear that, because for those of us who are actually delivering healthcare, and I have to interject here that doesn't actually include me anymore because I am retired. But from my perspective, and from the perspective of most of my colleagues, it seemed like our patients were getting that surprise little notice in the mail again and again and again and again, and everybody knew that it was unfair, but it didn't seem to us that anybody was taking any interest at all. But it sounds like clearly you were, and it sounds like there has been a good bit of conversation in Washington. I have to tell you that, frankly, I'm a little surprised to hear that. So tell us more.
Certainly, Randy. So this goes back, I would say, all the way back to the passage of the Affordable Care Act back in March of 2010. Mm-hmm. The ACA had the chance to fix this issue of surprise medical bills, and they intended to do so. However, once regulators got a hold of the issue after the law was enacted, they basically gave health insurance plans a way out, saying that they had to pay the greater of 3 amount. The AMA actually warned that this would lead to a drop in the contracted rate and also lead to more surprise medical bills, and that's exactly what happened. So after much debate on Capitol Hill, many stakeholders weighing in, multiple competing proposals within up to 5 committees of jurisdiction in Washington, both on the House and on the U.S. Senate side as well, we finally had a quote-unquote solution that was, I'm going to say, snuck into last year's omnibus spending bill, 5,000 plus pages of it, what we technically call the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So now patients are out of the middle. Patients will be held harmless, and starting January 1st of 2022, it will be illegal for a provider to submit a bill to patients for their out-of-network services for a greater amount than what that in-network rate would be.
So I guess my next question is going to be, is it really going to work? And as you might guess, my reason for being a little bit skeptical is because we have seen how powerful the insurance lobby can be in the past. So is this really going to make a difference?
Randy, that has been a keen focus of ours, and it's where a lot of our advocacy comes into play. I want to first step back and go to March 2010 when the Affordable Care Act was enacted. Keep this in mind, and I'm going to close with another financial tidbit that kind of puts this all into perspective. 11 plus years ago, United Health's stock was trading at about $30 a share. I want your listeners to keep that in the back of their mind. Right now, and I wrote a piece recently for Real Clear Health about this, we are trying to wake up patients, wake up organized medicine, whether it's state societies, specialty groups, and raise awareness around what is going on now with this law, the No Surprises Act, because the Department of Health and Human Services has significant leeway over how they're going to implement this law. Now, Congress has asked them to carry out their regulatory process to get this law ready. They have 1 year since passage of the law, Randy. So they have until December 27th of this year to promulgate their regulations. But the health insurance companies, Randy, are very hard at work, very quietly, trying to hijack this regulatory implementation process in their favor.
The only surprise to me about that is that they're being quiet. Because I have no idea. I have no doubt that they want to put a stop to this immediately.
And the key provision in the law, Randy, is the construction of the IDR, the Independent Dispute Resolution Process. This was first put out by New York, actually, back in 2014. New York was the first state in the country to have a surprise medical bill law. And it's worked very well. It uses what we call a baseball-style arbitration, whereas the provider and the health insurance plan both offer their payment number to an independent arbiter, and then that entity, the IDR entity, chooses which is the fair payment, either the doctor's charge or what the insurer is willing to pay.
And this is before the consumer ever sees a bill, is that right?
Yes. So, as you know, Randy, a physician could take a patient to court for payment. And we've had neutral arbiters as a basis of our legal system for the history of our country. But yes, this allows both insurers and physicians to negotiate ahead of time. Now, if negotiations break down, then they can move to the IDR process.
Who decides who is an independent arbiter?
That's going to be up to the regulatory process. They're going to have to identify these IDR entities, of which there are many across the nation, to be certified to help implement this law. And we want to make sure that the health insurance plans don't game the system. And when I say quietly, Randy, I think your listeners, some of whom probably have heard about this already, but they have a complete and total assault being brought to bear on this issue. There's an organization that folks who follow this issue read a lot about. It's called the USC Brookings Schaefer Initiative for Health Policy. Now, a lot of folks may be interested with USC, the University of Southern California, and also the Brookings Institute here in Washington. It's a very prominent, well-regarded think tank. But the Schaefer is actually Leonard Schaefer, the former founding chairman and CEO of WellPoint. WellPoint now being Anthem.
Yeah.
This so-called think tank, Randy, puts out lots of studies, lots of economic reports, lots of expert analysis that is basically during the insurance plan's bidding under the guise of a academic or think tank cover. So if you know that, it's very easy to see whose side they're on. Not ours as patients, not on physicians, not on underserved communities, not for rural hospitals. They're in it for their bottom line. There's also an individual in Texas, Randy. His name is John Arnold. He made a lot of money working for infamous Enron, and then via a hedge fund he has in Houston. He has taken a particular interest in this issue, totally trying to skew the debate in favor of health insurers. His organization, Arnold Ventures, Randy, has supplied $1.3 million in funding to the Brookings part of the USC Brookings Schaefer Initiative. He's also given over $3.6 million to the University of Southern California to promote what we believe to be pro-insurance propaganda. It's frightening. And we really can't cede any more power to this health insurance industry that is recording record profits when the rest of us are not doing too well.
Every time I enter into a discussion of this particular topic, I just get to a point where I just don't quite know what to say. I can't even find the words to describe what the motivation might be for any company anywhere to conscientiously do what they can to take advantage of people who are facing literally life-changing issues, maybe even life-ending issues, without being able to consult their own conscience in the process. And it sounds to me like that's exactly what's going on. And am I just too ridiculously naive on this issue? Is this something that we should simply expect and be prepared to deal with it in perpetuity? Or is there potentially an end in sight? What do you think?
You know, Randy, I do not think naivete is part of the equation, but what is happening within Washington is unconscionable when you think about it. I'll give you another example that I think your listeners would be very interested in hearing about. There are a lot of folks who wrote the No Surprises Act, staffers who work on Capitol Hill. There's a gentleman by the name of Adam Buckaloo. He was working on the Senate side of Congress on the HELP Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. He was serving there, Randy, as the Deputy Health Policy Director, and in that capacity was one of the primary authors of this legislation that will have a profound impact on the very survival of the medical profession, but also for delivery of care across the nation, especially to those most vulnerable, communities of color, rural communities, inner city communities. We spoke with Mr. Buckaloo back in December, right when this law was about to be passed. And there were changes made the week of that were pretty significant right before passage. Now, many members of Congress didn't even have a chance to read this bill, but it was passed in a must-pass omnibus at the end of the year. Back in March of this year, Mr. Buckaloo started his own consulting firm, Leaving the Hill, right? We always hear about the revolving door in Washington. A lot of people do it. It's kind of a nature of the swamp, so to speak. However, just last month, Randy, Mr. Buckaloo is now lobbying for Blue Cross Blue Shield and Anthem on the No Surprises Act that he helped write in front of the Biden administration.
Wow. So
I hope, and I'll have some suggestions on how we all as a community, as physicians, as patients, as people who care about healthcare, can hopefully make our voices heard a bit louder. But this is what we're dealing with.
Well, this is truly stunning. And every time I enter one of these conversations about healthcare economics, I find myself in that same dream state that I was just talking about. I just can't get my head around it. But first of all, let me say that I am, for a change, encouraged that there are people like yourself who appear to be willing to stay on the right side of the revolving door. And thank you so much for that. Before we sort of move into our closing comments here, I think we're at a point where I would like to give you an opportunity to speak to physicians and tell them why and how, and the 1, 2, 3, the ABC of how they can get involved and how they can make a difference.
Absolutely, Randy. I would first say that for physicians, specifically on this issue, for those who may or may not be involved in advocating for your profession, because if you don't, then this law is really going to, I think, steamroll independent practices and lead to higher consolidation and higher prices, Randy. I would say, one, contact your state society, contact your specialty society, ask them what they're doing, encourage them to speak up about this law. And in particular, the HHS regulatory implementation process that's going on right now and is currently being led by CMS's Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight. The B, Randy, I would say, write a letter, contact HHS, talk about how if you're an independent practice, you're struggling with COVID. talk about how, in 2012, 50% of physicians were independent physicians. And now it's probably 31%. The medical profession's livelihood, I would say, Randy, is on the line with this law. And then the C, I would also talk to your colleagues, see what they're talking about. Ask them to contact their members of Congress. Those would be 3 quick recommendations on how we could help the profession, Randy, and ultimately patients come out and make sure that this No Surprises Act is implemented fairly and is not biased towards any one side, either insurer or provider.
Well, I certainly hope everybody that hears this episode will do exactly that and recruit everybody that they can to take part in that effort. There's one other little thing that I want to ask you about before we get into your prescriptions for success, and that is I noticed in some of your writings you referenced some contact that you've had with the AMA, with the American Medical Association, and I suspect you're probably aware that the majority of physicians in this country are not members of that organization, and the reason they are not is because in the past, the AMA doesn't seem to have acted in our best interest. Mm-hmm. Can you give us an idea of where the AMA has stood on this very issue?
Absolutely, Randy. If you go back towards last year, and I'm speaking personally, we were waiting on AMA to come and speak for the House of Medicine. You rightfully point out, I think their membership is now only 15% of practicing physicians in the country.
I had no idea it was that low, but I can't say I'm surprised.
Yeah, which is a shame, although there are, my opinion, far more agile and better voices, especially for the independent physician in the country. Mm-hmm. The AMA, Randy, came out with a terrific letter last year, right as this was coming down to the line on negotiation, that really stepped up for the House of Medicine, gave patients a chance, because if insurers are allowed to dictate the regulations of the No Surprises Act, Randy, then patients will lose, insurance networks will be narrower, and the cost of care will go up and the quality will go down. So we're waiting for AMA to weigh in as we speak with their recommendations on the HHS regulatory process. So we'll see what they say.
Do you think the politicians are more likely to be influenced by the AMA as opposed to specialty organizations like the American College of Surgeons, the American College of Physicians, and on and on and on, or does it really matter?
I think the specialties, or if you look at ACEP, for example, Randy, or the College of Surgeons, the specialties working in concert with AMA provide the most powerful voice in Washington. I would not say that one group has a better voice than the other, but we know that the specialties need to speak up as well as AMA, because at the end of the day, we can't let the health insurance plans dictate even further and add to their already record profits by hijacking this law.
Well, it certainly sounds like this is a time when we can't afford not to speak with one voice, whether it's a single organization or whether it's a chorus of organizations, because it's just so terribly important. And I know that any practicing physician that's hearing this podcast is absolutely aware of that, because I can't think of anybody that I know of that is able to escape this kind of predatory pricing, as I like to call it. The only exceptions to that would be people in this new model of so-called direct primary care, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And then the sort of surgical equivalent of that, people that don't deal with insurance anyway, like cosmetic plastic surgery and those sorts of things that are clear fee-for-service providers, and the patient/client knows exactly what they're going to have to pay beforehand. And I think that's kind of what all we're asking for, right? Mm-hmm. Just like to know what the bill is going to be before we sign up.
Yeah, you just want to know what the bill is going to be, Randy. And then, also from a provider standpoint, you want fair compensation for your services.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're in network and contracted, out of network and non-contracted. If these regulations are heavily tilted towards what the insurers want, which is taking any out-of-network surprise bill and then pegging it to a median contracted in-network rate, those rates keep going down for everybody.
Yep.
Whether you're employed by a hospital and you get a kickback of a facility fee, these in-network rates are already artificially low. So we have to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you as big as I possibly can. I mean, this is an issue that has touched practically every physician that I've ever worked with, and we all have been very dismayed at the apparent lack of influence that we can exert. And finally, it sounds as if you and other organizations, few and far between as they may be, to really shine the light on this incredibly crippling practice that has had no brakes put on it in any way, in any shape, for decades and decades and decades. So thank you so very much for deciding to make that a major interest in your work. You are to be congratulated. And I, on behalf of other physicians, will take the opportunity to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts, because it's just so very important.
Well, thank you, Randy. And it's an honor to do it.
Well, what I'd like to do now, Chris, is get into our closing segment, which we always invite our physician guests to give us a little recipe for how they became successful. So what I'm going to do at this point is close my mic and listen for a few minutes. And Christopher Sheeron, who is a lobbyist on behalf of physicians and other healthcare providers, is going to give us his prescriptions for success.
Thank you, Randy. I would say, first and foremost, be all about commitment and take commitments seriously, whether they're to your family or your friends or your practice or your job. These days, people are so quick to cancel plans or to push off a deadline or to come up with an excuse because we are all so busy. Take commitment seriously and make commitment a big part not only of your personal life, but of your professional life. 2, Randy, I would say, be open to people. People can change your lives in ways you never would have imagined. So I would advise, and I've done this going back to my mentor plane story, Randy, of, removing the earbuds, getting off the phone, hopping up from the computer, meet people. They will change your life, mostly for the better. 3rd, I would say, and this goes to show you how old-fashioned I am, I would close by saying, read newspapers and write handwritten letters. I feel like when you're reading the newspaper, you're engaged for the day, you're on top of issues. I do it for professional reasons, obviously, but I think being up to speed on current events makes you a more interesting person, too. And like I said, letter writing. I cannot tell you how many times I have written a letter to somebody, even if it's a simple thank you note, or a much more extensive letter to catch up with a friend, or maybe it's just sharing a piece of information with a colleague. People remember that. And I guess in closing, I would say a motto I've always lived by, Randy, is something that I learned when I was a young kid, which is do the right thing at the right time, regardless of who is watching, because it's the right thing to do. I think that would be my prescriptions for success.
That is some really well thought and wise advice, Chris. And thank you so much for being here to share those thoughts with us. It's been a great conversation. And
likewise, Randy.
I think all of us are better off if we step outside of our usual circle of colleagues and comrades and talk to someone who has a different way of seeing things, and to run into a guy like you really makes that experience all the better. And again, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can find you and where you would like them to look, whether it be email address, websites, blogs, whatever you have in mind. This is the place to tell it all. So go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Randy. You can find us online on our website at action, the letter 4, health.org. So action4health.org. We do a lot of social and digital media advocacy as well. So you could find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. And if anyone would like to reach out to me, please feel free to give me a call. I am happy to chat either in confidence or publicly. You could reach me at 202-823-2333.
Well, thank you again for being with us, Chris. We really appreciate it. Audience, you've been listening to Mr. Chris Sheeron, who is lobbying on behalf of physicians in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., against one of those things that not only makes our lives miserable, but makes our patients' lives miserable, and that's surprise medical billing, something that I'm sure we would all like to see go away. So, Chris, thanks again for being here. Audience, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Prescription for Success.
Wonderful to be with you, Randy. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Chris Sheeron. Well, I have one last thing before we go. Remember, Advice Media. Don't forget to check them out if you're looking to improve your website or need strategic insight on what your current online presence is doing or not doing for you. Contact Advice Media at drpodcastnetwork.com/Advice Media. And that's a wrap for this episode of Prescription for Success. Special thanks to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music. Also, no matter where you follow our podcast, please like and subscribe. It helps us a lot if you leave a 5-star rating, and your suggestions always help us get better. We'd also love for you to visit our website and leave your personal prescription for success on SpeakPipe. We might just play your comments on the show. Thanks so much for listening, and remember to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.